Well, welcome to our Thursday night Bible study. We're going to be in the book of Matthew, and we'll go ahead and start in chapter 10. And as we get going on this, we need to kind of think back to what's happened in the previous couple of chapters, because what happens in chapter 10 is kind of a summary, and the things that happen in chapters 8 and 9 play into what goes on in chapter 10 in a way that we want to understand. And so what we'll do as we go through this, we'll keep in mind that Jesus here, remember, is representing Israel, and he is the Word incarnate. And so we want to bear both of those things in mind as we get through this. So let's go ahead. If you guys just have your Bibles, just flip back to chapter 8. And if you recall, chapter 8 is what takes place just after the Sermon on the Mount. And in that chapter, Jesus cleanses a leper. You have the faith of a centurion. And then you have Jesus healing a number of people, including Peter, his mother, mother-in-law, thank you. I knew there was more to that. Mother-in-law. And so all those things happen right after Jesus gives this word about the kind of the ethics or the way that the kingdom functions. And then Jesus talks about the cost of following him. Remember that we talked about that discipleship was part of this three-part structure that happened over and over again. Remember that Jesus does some miracles. Jesus says a few words about his ministry, and then Jesus calls people into discipleship. That was the pattern. Now, after that, Jesus calms a storm. In verse 23, he starts doing that. And then in verse 28, he heals two men with demons. And then in chapter 9, he heals a paralytic. So chapter 9 starts off with him healing a paralytic, and then he calls Matthew in verse 9 of chapter 9. He deals with, in verse 14, a question about fasting. And then in verse 18, there's a girl restored to life and a woman healed. Remember, we have all these miracles taking place. Verse 27, Jesus heals two blind men, and then Jesus heals a man unable to speak. And then let's go ahead and start reading in chapter 9, verse 35, because he's going to kind of sum up this idea of calling disciples. All right, so let's look at that. Chapter 9, verse 35.
And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest."
Okay, so Jesus is saying, look, this is kind of the summary of both the healing and the calling to discipleship. Is he's saying, look, there's people here who are like sheep without a shepherd. There are people here that are ready to be harvested into the kingdom, but the workers are few. And so that's going to lead us into chapter 10. Now, when we get into chapter 10, understand that Jesus calling the disciples into ministry is going to be the direct result of everything that we see in chapters 8 and 9. Okay, this is the next logical thing to happen. So let's go ahead and start reading in chapter 10, and let's read verse 1 through 4.
And he called to them his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these: first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him.
Okay, so Jesus has these 12 apostles now, and he's going to give them authority, and he's going to send them out. Now,
that's an interesting word.
Yeah.
Authority, not I give them the ability to do it.
Right, or power, or
the power to do
right.
it, but the authority to do it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting word, and that's actually at the heart of what's happening in all these. We see this. You're exactly right. We see this as an issue of power. Like if I had the power, I could heal this person, or if I had the power, I could deal with this problem or change this thing. And we talk about like, changing the world. If I had the power, and we, in our culture, the big, the archetype is the superhero. The superhero has power, right? Now here's the thing: think about the superhero archetype for just a second. What's wrong with that archetype from the standpoint of looking at it in terms of reality? Like, would it be good if we had superheroes?
You like that show, The Boys?
The Boys? I haven't seen it.
Corruption.
Okay, corruption. So here's the thing: is normally the problem just a lack of power. You know what I'm saying? Like if you look at our world, you say, well, everything would be great if we just had added more power to it. No. That's not the primary problem that we have here on our planet, is that we just don't have enough power. The thing is, with you look at the history of the 20th century as a great example, right? Because we had the Industrial Revolution, and then we had that kind of start in textiles and go to all different kinds of aspects of our life. People moved in off the farms. They started working in factories. We have, all the inventions that took place. And then in the 20th century, we have more power than at any time in history. And what was the end result of that power? The end result of that power was just massive killing, just unimaginable killing that took place. And the interesting thing is, I spent 4 years going over this video series on the Great War. They posted an episode every week, kind of what happened 100 years earlier in the Great War, and people were shocked at the death that took place. And in fact, what happened with France is that early in the war, in the first month of the war, they sustained such staggering losses that they never really recovered from those. And the reason they sustained such staggering losses is there hadn't really been a war with all of the modern machinery, and especially machine guns. They didn't really know what that was going to look like. And so largely they had people on horseback riding towards machine guns, and they had people marching towards machine guns, and they the loss was staggering. Even now, battles like the Somme and things like that, they have such huge death tolls that we don't have battles like that anymore.
Did Russia lose 16 million soldiers?
I think that was World War II. Yeah, World War II. And that was one of the points that I was going to get to here, is that as bad as that was, they thought this will never happen again because it was just so horrible, that it actually happened again, and it happened worse like 20 years later. And so the way that you look at history here is that power is not necessarily the answer to the problems. But we have that belief still, and it's kind of insane that we can think that that's still the problem after experiencing what we've experienced over the last 100 or
That's the
150
funny
years.
thing about the Luke Skywalker movies.
Mm-hmm. Star Wars.
They have all this stuff, ships flying around, and they're still shooting guns.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like this one thing that can kill 1 billion people at once. You still have to aim it full.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting is, again, you have all this power, and yet what do we have? We have the same issues playing out. Our imagining of the future is that we have all this power, but we have the same problems that we do today, right? You have good guys, you have bad guys, you have people trying to use things for terrible reasons.
We're talking about that right now with China. That we're
Right.
scared to death of China.
Yeah, and I don't know.
It says there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Throughout history, there is nothing new.
Right, so
We just rearrange it.
yeah, so human nature is what the problem is. And really that's kind of what's happening here, is that Jesus is giving them authority to do their ministry, not giving them power necessarily, giving them authority. And we should recognize that there's a difference in those two things. And to help us understand that, it might be good for us to go back to Isaiah chapter 60. And remember when we were taking our trip on Sunday mornings in the sermons through Isaiah, we ended with this section of Isaiah 60 through 66. And there's a lot of positivity in Isaiah 60 through 66. And in that passage or the chapter of Isaiah 60, there's a vision of what Israel could be like. Right. So let's read the first 7 verses of that chapter, and we'll see what that looks like.
Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you, and nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together, they come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be carried on the hip. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and exult, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall bring good news, the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you. The rams of Baoth shall minister to you. They shall come up with acceptance on my altar, and I will beautify my beautiful house.
Okay, so this is a picture of God saying that his house, his temple, is going to be beautified. And it's going to be beautified by this influx from all over the world. Like all of a sudden, Zion is this beaming light to the world, and everybody from all over the world is coming, and they're bringing all of the treasure, all the glory of everything from around the world, and they're all coming here. And it's a picture of Israel as Israel was supposed to be. Remember, Israel was supposed to be a priest to the nations. They were supposed to be drawing the entire world to a relationship with God. That was their job as priest. Now remember, Jesus here is Israel. He's fulfilling what Israel was supposed to do. Okay, so when Jesus is doing this ministry, and then he's talking about discipleship, and he's talking about how there's so many people here that are ready to be brought into the kingdom, but the workers are few, and he's going to send out the 12. What Jesus is doing is he's acting like Israel's supposed to do. And remember, he says first to Israel, and then to everybody else. So at first here, they're not supposed to go to the Gentiles. Now, that's not because Jesus doesn't want anything to do with the Gentiles. The Bible, even this passage that we read in Isaiah chapter 60, is very much interested in bringing the entire world. But what has to happen is that the house has to be put right first before they can bring other people in, right? You always start with the house of God. When we were talking about kings in our Sunday school class, the kings that are going to do well, what are they going to do? They're going to put the house in order. They're going to put the temple in order. And that's a picture of putting the kingdom in order so that then the rest of the world can be drawn in. So Jesus here what he's doing is he's being the fulfillment of what Israel was supposed to be.
You know, if you were really a person in these days like the Sadducees that were against Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
you could really say, how arrogant is this guy?
Oh, yeah.
He's not just whipping out a new weapon. Here, I invented a gun and
Right.
it's going to work. He says, I have authority over all this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and when you say you have authority...
That's really an amazing... I've never even noticed that.
Yeah, so this is a key word for this passage is authority, because think about the difference between authority and power. So you can say, somebody could come into this room and say, hey, I have power. They could bring, like you said, they could bring a gun and they could say, hey, I want all your valuables. I want all whatever. They could bring a gun in here and they're saying, I have power over you. But they're not coming in here and saying, I have authority over you. That's a completely different thing, right? So if somebody comes in here and says, I have authority over you, what it means is that all of this belongs to them. It's not just that they have the power to get something that they want. It's that it rightfully already belongs to them.
Well, they don't just have authority over us, they have authority over the bad things too.
Right.
That the people are afraid of, the satanic, no matter how much Satan wins, he loses at the end.
Right. And so when Jesus gives them authority over the unclean spirits and all those kinds of things, that's another interesting thing. So that basically Jesus isn't isn't setting up a system here where Jesus is saying, I have a weapon and I can use it against the evil forces. He's basically saying, I have authority over the evil forces. Right? So that's a different level of power. Like, again, we could say, I could be a soldier in World War II and I could fight against the Japanese with the weapons that have been given me. And I might even be, invading Okinawa, right? And invading their land and fighting against them. But if I walk into Okinawa and say, I have authority here, well, basically I'm saying I'm the emperor, right? That's an order of magnitude different than having power. And that's something that we should really consider here, because what Jesus is going to get into is he's going to say, okay, Jesus has authority over all of this, and then he's going to give it to the 12 for the purposes that he desires. Now again, that doesn't mean that the 12 all of a sudden have power. Power is something that you can use in any way that you want, but authority is something that has to be used in a way that's legitimate to the thing that grants it to you, right? So here's the thing, if I give somebody a gun, they can use that gun in whatever way that they want, right? Because they now own the gun, so they have authority over the gun, they have authority over the power, and they can use that in whatever way that they want. But if I give somebody authority, that authority actually only extends to the way in the area that I've given it to them. But it's actually better to have authority than to have power, because it's an order of magnitude higher. It's something that I don't have to, if you have power and you go against, like as an example, if I'm a soldier and I'm going to Okinawa, I might have a gun, which gives me some power, but now I have to use that power against them, right? There's going to be a fight. But if I have authority, that's a whole different thing. Right? I could go in there and I could command them to do what they're supposed to do. That's not a fight. You know what I'm saying? That's just an establishment of my authority. So Jesus here is giving the 12 disciples authority over unclean spirits. So here's the thing. We'll ask it this way. Larry, if I give you authority over the unclean spirits, do you have to be more powerful than they are? Is it a fight? Am I giving you a gun?
I think power would have something to do with it, but if I had authority, doesn't the Bible say, all I have to do is say?
Right. All you have to do is command them. So here's the thing. I could give you a gun and say, fight the evil spirits, or whatever weapon you would use to fight them, but then you're going to be engaged in a fight. Or I can give you authority over the evil spirits, which then there's no fight there. That's the great thing about this. There isn't a fight here. It's just
kind of in a real mini version. I mean, can you imagine one person saying, I want all these millions of Jews killed? One person said that.
Yeah.
And they did it.
Right. So he was exercising authority.
That's power.
Right.
But
yeah, he was exercising. That's like what I'm saying is it's an order of magnitude different. And that's the thing that we have to get in our minds, because I think a lot of times as Christians, we imagine God giving us a weapon when really what God is giving us is authority. And that's an important distinction to make, because we have so here's the thing, if you're given a gun, let's say all of us here, we find ourselves drafted by the United States, and it's World War II and we have to go invade Okinawa, and they give us a gun. Well, that's still a very fearful thing, right? It's a very, you're going into that, you're going to be shaking. Do you guys remember the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, where they're going into D-Day?
My father did that.
Oh, did he?
In World War II.
That had to be terrifying.
And Bougainville, and then, what's the real famous one?
I don't know.
Iwo
Iwo Jima?
Excuse me?
Iwo Jima?
No.
No.
Anyway, he was one of those people that did that.
And I'm sure that was terrifying. Because the thing is that if you're given a weapon, you have to use that weapon, and maybe it'll be enough and maybe it won't, and there's going to be a fight, and that's a terrifying thing to enter into. And at the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, they're in the boats, they're heading toward the beaches, and the guys are vomiting, and some of that's seasickness, and some of it's just plain fear. It's terror.
I'm going to tell a story, but that's my dad's story, that the Navy misjudged the depth of the water.
Uh-huh.
And when they went over the side of the ship, they lost 5,000 Marines in the water because they couldn't walk. It was too deep for them.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and it was like a once in a 100-year tide or something. Yeah. And so, and that's the thing is that you're still going to be afraid because the issue is still in doubt. But what we're going to see here is when Jesus sends out the 12, that's not the way he sends them out. So let's read verse 5 through 15, and we'll get a bigger look at what Jesus is actually sending them out to do.
These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And proclaim as you go, saying, The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town."
All right, so what Jesus is saying here is like, look, you're going to go here, and he gives them a list of things that they're going to do. They're going to proclaim that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So the kingdom of heaven has to do with authority. It has to do with the king being there and the rules or the nature of the kingdom being established. And then he says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Now here's the thing that's important about this, again, is that he hasn't given them power to do these things. He's given them authority to do these things. Now, what does that mean? And this is where we have to look back to chapters 8 and 9. Why is it that we have all of this list of miracles in chapters 8 and 9?
Show that Jesus has authority.
Yeah, Jesus is showing that he has authority over these things. And so if we look back again, over chapters 8 and 9, look at just the wide variety of things that Jesus has authority over. So Jesus has authority over leprosy, right? And that's a kind of death. He has authority that he can heal somebody from a distance with a word. Now again, that's with a word at a distance, that's more authority than power. Remember that the centurion said, hey, I understand this because I'm a man who has authority and I'm a man who's under authority, so I know that you can just say the word. See, again, the centurion is setting up a situation where Jesus is being seen as a man with authority, not with power. He doesn't say, I understand how power works. He says, I understand how authority works. You can just say the word and it's going to be carried out. Right? Then he heals many, then he talks about discipleship. Right? Why is he talking about discipleship in the midst of doing these healings where he's being shown to have authority? What does it mean to be a disciple?
Follower.
Yeah, it's like a student, a follower. Yeah, it literally means to be under the discipline of somebody. Okay, so that's why we get disciple or discipleship. It comes from the word to discipline. So when you discipline somebody, what do? It could be a reprimand. That's how we think of it. And there is that aspect to it. But what else?
It's a bringing into the line of understanding.
Right. So there's a positive aspect to it, which is you show people what to do. You reprimand them when they're off. The line is a good way of thinking about this, right? When they get off the trail, then you tell them, hey, you're off the trail. But then mostly it's about showing them what the trail is. And so when you discipline somebody, when you disciple them, that's what you're doing, is you're showing them kind of the way to live. And really what Jesus is doing is he's showing his authority over people. Now, basically what we have here is something that's really fascinating, is Jesus goes and shows his authority over almost every aspect of reality. He has authority over demons. Remember, he casts out the demons. He has authority over the wind and the waves. He has authority over illnesses. He has authority over all these things. What doesn't he have authority over? Who isn't recognizing his authority? What isn't recognizing his authority in the world? Satan, the Pharisees, right? So Satan and people who to Jesus he will say, you are of your father, the devil, right? So Satan isn't recognizing his authority. And there's a lot of people that aren't recognizing his authority. So imagine this is the situation. Jesus comes down to earth, and almost everything instantly recognizes his authority, except for quite a few people. And they just refuse. Right? Now, eventually Jesus will assert his power. But right now he's asserting authority, which is different. And the thing is that these people have free will, and so they can recognize the authority of Jesus, or they can rebel against the authority of Jesus. But the problem is that, Jesus also has power as well as authority. And I think when you look at the book of Revelation and some other things, you see Jesus, what it looks like when Jesus is going to exercise his power against people who refuse to bow to his authority. But right now, what Jesus is doing is he's calling people to be under his authority. That's why the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The question is, where is the kingdom of heaven? So if I had to ask you guys, say, well, show me where the kingdom of heaven is found, what would you show me? Where can I find it? Where can I go? Is there a monastery somewhere in Tibet where they're humming and doing that throat singing and stuff? There's no throat singing in Tibet?
No, Tibet,
Yes. Yeah.
Kingdom of Heaven.
Oh, yes. Yes. It seems unlikely to be found there. It's not a joyful noise. So where yes, where would we find the kingdom of heaven? So the
kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Right.
When you are living with Christ in charge of your life, you are
Right.
living in the kingdom.
Yeah, the kingdom of heaven exists where the hearts of people are submitted to his will. And so the kingdom of heaven is at hand. You can, like everything else in reality, you can submit yourself to the authority of Jesus. And it's better to submit to the authority of Jesus than to the power of Jesus. Right? The authority of Jesus is going to call you into obedience. He's going to call you into relationship. And what's great is what he'll show through this is that the kingdom is not based on it's not based on the exercise of raw power. It's actually based on the recognition of love. And we'll get into that later. But the point here is that what we have is a situation where Jesus is just demonstrating his authority over everything, except for there's some people who don't recognize it.
What people make the mistake of thinking is that if I'm good enough and Christ is going to let me be in heaven.
Right.
What they fail to realize is that they could have that here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the kingdom of
So
heaven.
they're always waiting for something that's better.
Yeah, I can't wait until I can do that. I can't wait. Well, what's stopping you? You can start living like that now. Now, here's the thing. Jesus is going to get into a little problem in the plan here. So let's look at verses 16 through 25, because what Jesus is going to say is, look, some people aren't recognizing my authority, and that will cause some problems here.
Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves.
Okay, let's stop there for just a second. Okay, so he's sending them out as sheep among wolves. Now, why would you use that metaphor? So, oftentimes in Scripture, believers, the church or whatever, we're seen as sheep. Jesus talks about finding the sheep, and he's the good shepherd and all that kind of stuff. The thing is it a compliment to be compared to sheep?
No.
Not exactly. No, they're not the most noble of animals. They're not the most regal. Like one of my favorite animals I've talked about is an elk. I love seeing elk, especially if you have a big bull elk. They just kind of walk through the forest like they own the place, and there's a nobility there, and they're just really cool. I love watching them. Sheep don't do that. And the question is that, sheep, well, first of all, sheep aren't the brightest things in the world. So have you guys ever heard any of the things that sheep will do that are problematic?
They'll follow the leader anywhere.
Right, they'll follow the leader anywhere, and they don't really pick the leader with any kind of acumen, right? What else will they do? Any other ideas?
Well, continuing the following the leader thing, if the one in front of them jumps because of something, all the following ones will jump, even if there's nothing there.
Yeah, even if there's nothing at all there. And I've actually witnessed that firsthand, and it's one of the craziest things to watch is you'll have sheep. We used to watch them in Colorado because they would let them out of these big trucks to go in the summertime to pasture in the mountains. And they would let them out of the trucks, and the first few would run out, and then one would jump over an imaginary thing, and then the others would jump over an imaginary thing. Oh, well, there must be something there. But along with that, if one of them that's leading kind of jumps into a river, they all will, and a lot of times because of their wool, they will sink. I mean, they sink like a stone. They'll drown themselves. They'll, almost any way you can imagine them dying, they will die. And it becomes even more of a problem when you have a predator like a wolf around. So the thing is, how does a sheep defend itself against a wolf?
They need shepherd.
Right. So, headbutt, yes. Generally, that doesn't work. It's pretty ineffective. They can't really run away. Yeah. If you have a sheep that has horns on it, like a wild mountain sheep, that he might be able to, like you said, try to butt his head against an aggressive. But the kind of sheep that we're talking about here, they have no natural defenses, and if a wolf gets in there, they just die. They just die. And the question becomes, I don't know if you guys have ever thought about this, but you think about sheep, these kind of sheep, and you think, how do they exist in the wild? Like they're dumb. They have no natural defenses. How do they exist in the wild? They procreated like rabbits, huh? Actually, they don't really exist in the wild. So they've been bred to be this out of things that were a little bit more robust, let's say, things that had horns and stuff like that. But they've been bred to this point now where they provide the most wool, the most meat, the most all. They're better for humanity, but that means that they're completely dependent upon the shepherd. You're right. The only defense mechanism they have is the shepherd.
But we can't look at just the first sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sending you out like sheep.
Right.
But then it goes on, therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves.
Right.
So you can't stop the metaphor with just the sentence before it.
Mm-hmm.
They are to be like sheep, but they're not like sheep.
Right.
They become shrewd and.
Yes, and so if we combine those two aspects of it, if we look at them being called to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, and we also look at the fact that Jesus is sending them out as sheep amongst wolves. Remember that Jesus gave them authority, not power, right? And so what does authority rely on? It relies on staying within the will of the person who gave you the authority. So where is the wisdom and innocence come in? It comes in as far as they have to be within the will of the person who sent them out. You need to be wise enough to stay in the will of the person who sent you out, and you need to be innocent enough to be free from the desire to go out of that will. And if you do that, then you'll be safe, because Jesus is sending them out with authority, and that authority is not something that they can use outside of what Jesus has given them. You see, that's the issue with authority is only useful when it's exercised in the manner of the person who's given it to you. So for instance, back in this day and age, one of the things that they would do is if you were a wealthy landowner and you would have often a ring that you would use to seal documents, and you could give that to a trusted servant, and he could go out and he could use your ring and he could enter into contracts as if he were you. Now here's the thing. I'm sure if you were a servant and you were walking around with your master's ring on, you felt like, you were pretty great stuff, Now the thing is, does that mean you could just go using that willy-nilly to buy stuff that you wanted and all that kind of? No, that's not what it meant at all. If you did that, you'd be thrown out into the darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Probably you would enter into slavery where you would, spend 6 years paying that off. You didn't want to do that. But as long as you were using that ring, the idea of authority is it's really an expression of the will of the person who is above you. And that's what Jesus is giving them. And the thing that's interesting is that if the shepherd is there with the sheep, then they don't have anything to fear. But if they stray away from the shepherd, they have all kinds of things to fear. And that's the issue here, is that persecution's going to come. He's sending them out among wolves, people who are out for their own self-interest and don't care about hurting them. But if they're wise as serpents and innocent as doves, and they stay close to the shepherd and they stay within the will of the shepherd, then they're going to be fine. So let's continue on.
Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated for all my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household?
Okay, so Jesus here is going to say, look, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to be brought before governors and kings. You're going to deliver you, when they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you're going to speak. It talks about how they're going to deliver you over to the courts, flog you in the synagogues, you will be dragged before governors, all this kind of stuff. So this is a list of things that's going to happen. Now here's the thing. When Jesus sends out these 12 right now, is that what's going to happen? Do we have any record that this happens immediately right now? This time when they're getting sent out?
It's like you're reading my mind. I was just thinking, there's nothing in here that says they did that.
Right. Yeah, and so that's weird, right? And so one of the things that happens is...
Until we get to Pentecost.
Right. So one of the things that happens is some people who are critics of the Bible will say, oh, see, Jesus, he foretold this and it didn't happen. But it does happen. Now look, it says in verse 19, when they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you should be saying. It will be given you, for it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. They don't have the Spirit yet. Right? The Spirit comes at Pentecost, and so this isn't happening yet. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this, so this happens later after Pentecost. All this comes true. But if you look at verse 24, he says, a disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. So the other thing that's happening here is this isn't going to happen to them yet. Why? Because it hasn't happened to Jesus yet. But it's going to happen to Jesus. Right? Look at it again. It says... beware of men, for they will deliver you over to the courts. Does Jesus get delivered over to the courts? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you will be flogged in their synagogues. Does he get flogged? Yes. You will be dragged before governors and kings. Yes. Bear witness before them. Deliver you over, not be anxious. All this stuff, all this persecution that Jesus is talking about, it doesn't happen to the disciples yet because it hasn't happened to Jesus yet. And once again, Jesus is going to be the embodiment of true Israel. He's going to go through all this persecution first, and then the disciples will go through all the same persecution after the Spirit comes. But again, they're not going to lead the way. Jesus is here saying a disciple is not above his teacher. He's like, look, you guys aren't going to lead in this. I'll lead in this. Why? Because I'm the teacher. The disciple doesn't lead. The teacher leads. And so I'll lead in this, and then you guys will follow, and this will happen. So all of this makes complete perfect sense if you understand how to look at it, that it happens exactly the way that Jesus says. Now let's look at this piece from 26 to 33. And Jesus is going to talk about some things that are really interesting here. When we look at the whole chapter 8 through chapter 10 thing, it kind of ties a lot of things together.
So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven.
Okay, so Jesus' final thing is have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Now, the interesting thing is if you study this passage, you'll find a lot of sermons about how this is about all of people's sins being made known. Okay, and the interesting thing is that doesn't really lead us to having no fear, right? If Jesus says, hey, don't worry about any of this stuff, because every secret of your entire life is just going to be shouted from the rooftop. Everybody's going to know. You're probably like, oh, gee, thanks, Jesus. That just clears up the fear, right? No, that's not. So what is Jesus talking about here? What does he say for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known? What is he talking about there? What's been hidden and what needs to be revealed?
That Jesus is the Son of God.
Right. So Jesus being the Son of God is the thing that's going to be revealed. It's hidden now.
He is the Messiah, even though the Pharisees don't see it.
Yeah.
A lot of the Jews don't see it.
Yeah, and in fact, the whole idea of what Messiah is and all that kind of stuff, along with the identity of Jesus as the Messiah, just the whole idea of salvation, how it's going to come, all that stuff is known throughout the Bible as the mystery. And so when you were David and when you were going down to the tabernacle and you were going to do one of the sacrifices there because of your sins, you understood that God's grace was somehow involved in this, but you didn't really understand how that worked. You didn't understand necessarily how, killing this lamb and putting it on the altar or whatever it is, whatever offering you were giving, how that was going to translate into somehow being forgiven of your sins. And none of this stuff was really all that clear. They didn't really understand it. And that's why even the disciples, remember before Jesus dies on the cross, Peter says, no, Lord, this isn't going to happen. And Jesus says, oh, stand, get behind me, Satan. They don't understand all this. It's mysterious to them, but it's especially mysterious that Jesus is the Son of God, that when Jesus gives them authority, they don't really understand just how much authority they're dealing with and what they're dealing with. They have no concept of really who they're dealing with.
Isn't there a passage, though, that says they did go away for a while and then it came back to Jesus kind of with their tails between their legs because things didn't
Yeah,
work
so
out?
there's another passage that talks about them being sent out. This is the first time that they get sent out.
Temporary, kind
Yeah,
of like
yeah.
student teaching or something.
Yeah. So they don't really understand who they're dealing with. So Jesus is basically saying, don't have any fear, because eventually everything's going to be made known. Like the way that this really works and who I actually am, that's going to be made known. So you don't have to have any reason for fear. If you're dealing with the Messiah, the Christ, if you're dealing with God incarnate, then you don't have anything to worry about. If somebody else is in your face or, threatening you or whatever, you don't really have anything to worry about there. Now, again, does this mean that when he says that have no fear, does that mean that you'll never have any pain or suffering in your life? No. It means that there isn't anything to fear in the pain and suffering, because the pain and suffering are rewarded. Now, here's the interesting thing. What Jesus is talking about here, I think, can be summed up with the idea. Jesus goes to another place that's strange here, because he says, verse 28, "And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Now, that's not, again, another comforting thought in our modern mindset, right? Jesus is like, hey, I'm going to send you out into these terrible people, but don't fear them. Fear the God who's sending you out, because he's way worse, right? That's the way that it sounds to us, and it doesn't make a lot of sense how that's going to be comforting. But think about it this way. We think of fear in a certain respect, but there's more to fear than the way that we normally think about it. So you can think about it this way. There's a type of fear that the Bible and in old times they described as awe. And it's where we get our word awful. Right? So when you say something was awful, what do you mean by that?
Full of awe.
Full of awe, right? That's what it literally means. Is that the way we use it? No, that's not the way we use it at all. And it's kind of funny that it's come to mean almost precisely the opposite. But there's a connection there where awe is something that we don't tend to experience very often, and so we don't really quite understand it. Awful came to mean bad because there's an element of like recognizing how small you are. Like when you're experiencing awe, you're with something that's so large, so great, so powerful, so overwhelming that there is an aspect to it that is kind of like terror, but not exactly. It's not exactly like terror. It's just that you just recognize the strength, the power, the glory, the size, the immensity, the whatever that you're with. Now, here's the thing. If let's say you work for the president, and you're in the White House, and let's say that there's a janitor working in the White House. It's his first day on the job. And one of the things that they've told this janitor is, hey, if you see something that doesn't look right, if you see somebody that doesn't look like they belong, you make sure and to ask them what they're doing, right? And so he goes, oh, wow, I'm a janitor, but I work in the White House now, and I have some power here. And so let's say you're the personal assistant of the president, and you're off doing something for the president, and this janitor stops you and says, hey, what are you doing here? Are you going to be in fear of that janitor? No, you're not going to, right? Because the person who has given you authority is so much greater than that person, right? And even let's say maybe it's a security guard, but let's say it's somebody who's in the security detail there, and they don't know who you are. It's their first day, and they think that you're suspicious, and they draw their gun on you. Are you going to be sitting there quaking in fear over that person? Probably not, because you're like, number one, they're not going to shoot me. I'm not armed. Number two, when this gets found out in the end, they're going to be eating crow, right? They're gonna be in big trouble, right? You understand that. That's kind of the idea here. Is that the idea is that there's something. It's not that things can't be bad. It's that there's something that's so much bigger, so much more powerful that's the person that you really stand in awe of, not the other person. And I think that that's really what he's getting at here. And then there's an interesting caveat, because that can seem even still kind of impersonal. But in verse 29 it says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And you might think, well, okay, so basically, are we sparrows now? You know, we've been downgraded from sheep to sparrows. Sparrows back then, they would do is they would have these nets that would fall on sparrows. They'd put birdseed or whatever out, and they'd have these big nets that would fall on these sparrows. And sparrows, apparently, I've never had one. I want to someday eat a sparrow just to see if this is true or not. But supposedly they're very tasty, but they're like a crouton, you know. It's like nothing. So they're very cheap. Now people would buy them because they were tasty, but they're very cheap. You get 2 for a penny because there's nothing to them, right? So he's saying, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Aren't these sparrows like basically worthless? They're just nothing. Isn't that the case? And then he says, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. Now here's the thing that's really interesting about this is Jesus is saying, here's this guy that is so powerful, so full of awe, so full of majesty. He's the one you should really worry about. And not only that, this isn't just an issue of God's authority, but it's also an issue of God's love. That God even cares about the sparrows. Even something so worthless as a sparrow, God cares about that. Like, God's not going to let somebody just mistreat a sparrow. And so if somebody mistreats you, boy, they have something to answer for because you are so much more valuable than that sparrow. So this is the God who's given you authority, the God who's sending you out to bring people into the kingdom. Yes, you're going to face opposition because there's a lot of people in the world these people in the world are the only things that don't recognize my authority. So you're probably going to be persecuted by them, but don't even let that stop you, because in the end, God, who is so full of majesty, so full of glory, so full of wonder, and so full of power, He's the one that you're working for, and He cares about even the sparrows. How much more is He going to care about you? So that's the thing that Jesus is saying. Now, all of this, again, comes after all these miracles. And there's a reason why it comes after all the miracles, because Jesus is going to call His disciples to this ministry of bringing people in, and they need to understand the authority that they're being given. Now, they don't understand all of it, but they've gotten a pretty big taste of it in all the miracles that Jesus has done. And so here's the interesting thing. Later on in chapter 28 of Matthew, Jesus is going to say, all authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. And that great commission that He gives then is going to be backed up with the power of the Spirit. And it's the same commission that all of us operate under today. Like we've been called to reconcile people in this world to God, to this God who loves them. And we've been called to have this ministry of reconciliation so that these people don't have to live outside of the authority of God anymore, that they can orient their lives back to Him. They can turn back to the God who loves them. We've been given this authority, but the problem is that a lot of times we fear. And because we fear, we actually make small compromises that end up making a big difference. And what I mean by that is this, is that it's not so much persecution, it's just disapproval. That's the problem in our world today with the church, is that so much of the world disapproves of what the church has to say. And so we end up editing ourselves. We end up being silent. We end up not bringing people back into a relationship with God when we could, because we're afraid of them. And we don't understand the power and the glory and the majesty of the God who has given us authority. And if we understood that, I think that we would have a tendency to be more bold in the way that we express ourselves. But it's also important to recognize that it's not just about the message that we preach and the words that we say. It's also about the actions that we take. And one of the things that happens is it's really important that the church loves people, because when we speak about God's love but we don't show God's love, it's not very impressive to people. And one of the things that holds us back is we have a fear of loving people to no effect. You understand what I'm saying by that? We have a fear of showing love to people and not having it returned. We have a fear of putting ourselves out there and making the sacrifice of loving people and having it do nothing. And sometimes that fear is actually bigger than the fear of the opposition of people. Sometimes the fear of just thinking that I'll do all of this, I'll make these sacrifices and nothing good will happen, that's enough to keep us from doing what we should do. So we shouldn't let any of those things keep us from what God is sending us out to do, what Jesus is sending us out to do here.
But and he said that when you're going to a town or a village and you're trying to share the gospel and stuff, if they don't accept it, just
Shake the dust off your feet.
And move on.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
And don't worry about
Yeah.
the love coming back.
Right. That's the thing. It's hard. Failure is very hard to deal with, and he prepares them for that. I'm glad you made that point, Bonnie. Jesus prepares them for failure and saying, look, not everybody, some of these people who are living against the authority of Jesus are going to continue to do that. When that happens, yeah, you move on. You move on to, and one of the things that's hard is that we tend to fall into two different camps. Is either we get to the point where we're kind of hard-hearted and we don't put ourselves out there for anything, or we put ourselves out there and we keep dealing with infertile fields, and we spend all of our time doing that, and then we're not effective. And we don't want either one of those things. We want to move on. There are other people out there that will be receptive to the message, but we have to go to them. And we can't get so caught up on people who aren't responding, and we also can't just get hard-hearted at the point where we don't go out at all. So that's a great point. Thank you, Bonnie.
You know what's really,
Yep.
really done something for me, what you've been teaching, is how this isn't some kind of generalized, go out there and do the best you can. I mean, there's this, Jesus knows every step that's going to happen to these people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of, like in Matthew, the Great Commission.
Mm-hmm.
I never connected all this until I've listened to what you're saying.
Yeah,
When
it's
I listen, and sometimes I doze off.
it's all a big story, and that's the problem. Is we usually approach.
Yeah, he says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
To Acts 2:38, Peter says, repent, be baptized, every one of you.
Yeah, he says it, and they do it.
And he predicted that in the verses you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
If you could just see the whole picture, you could see all this stuff line up like cards falling.
Yeah.
Like dominoes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's in the time that, because I grew up as, my dad was a pastor. You know, when my dad was a pastor, and so I grew up in the church, and so, you know, I was familiar with a lot of Bible stories and stuff like that. But the thing, the longer that I'm a pastor now and the more time that I study, Larry, that's the thing that impresses me the most about the Bible, is that everything fits together. It's like the most amazing, you know, there's a show on Netflix called the Repair Shop, and there's a guy in there that repairs like watches and clocks. And so he'll open this clock up, and there's just, to me, it's just a mass of just super complicated things, but he knows how they all fit together. And his job, he has tiny little tools that he uses to make everything fit together. And when he makes everything fit together, well, then the clock just runs. And that's kind of how I see Scripture. And that's the thing that's impressed me more and more as I get older and I've studied more, is that just everywhere you look, everything just fits together. And in so many ways that you just can't reach the end of it. No matter how long you have to study it, it's always going to surprise you with the way that happens.
You gotta put that in like 10 pages or something.
Yes. Well, then it wouldn't be as impressive. Yeah, it wouldn't be as impressive to us if he had done it that way. So anyway, that's where we're going to stop for tonight. And so the idea here is that Jesus has given us authority as believers, and we should have no fear. And so let's try to remember that this week. And we'll go ahead and pray, and we'll be done. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the blessings you've given us. Thank you for the time that we're able to spend tonight in your word. I ask that you would help us, Father, to be transformed by your Spirit, that we might go out and just continue to reconcile the world to you. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we'll see you guys next week.